The diamond ring on her finger felt heavier than a coffin nail. On the night she was supposed to consummate her forced marriage to the city's most ruthless crime lord, 24-year-old Charlotte did the unthinkable. She looked the devil in the eye and demanded a divorce. His response? Absolute chills. The penthouse at the apex of the Cialdini Tower was a fortress of glass, steel, and suffocating silence. Below, the sprawling cityscape of Chicago glittered like scattered diamonds on black velvet. But inside the master suite, the atmosphere was as heavy as a crypt. Charlotte Montgomery, now Charlotte Vitiello, stood rigid in front of the floor-to-ceiling window. She was a vision in white silk, though she felt like anything but a vision. The bespoke designer wedding gown, commissioned by her cruel father, Roland Montgomery, was an architectural nightmare. It had been constructed with aggressive, bone-bruising corsetry, specifically engineered to compress, conceal, and minimize. Charlotte was not a small woman. She was plus-sized, possessing a soft, full-figured body that had been the subject of relentless mockery in the high society circles of the Chicago elite. Where her younger sister, Beatrice, was a waifish, size 2 socialite who floated through ballrooms, Charlotte was the heavy burden of the Montgomery family. She had spent her entire life being told to take up less space, to eat less, to speak less, to simply be less. Tonight, she had been traded like a piece of depreciating livestock to clear her father's 8-figure gambling debt. She had been handed over to Jaden Vitiello, the 32-year-old undisputed head of the Vitiello syndicate. Jaden was a man whose name was only spoken in hushed, terrified whispers. He was notoriously cold, fiercely intelligent, and possessed a violent streak that kept the entire eastern to seaboard's underworld in line. The heavy mahogany door clicked open. Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. She didn't turn around, though she saw his reflection in the dark glass of the window. Jaden stepped into the suite. He was imposing, standing well over 6 feet, his broad shoulders filling out a tailored black tuxedo that cost more than a luxury sedan. He smelled of rain, expensive aged whiskey, and the sharp metallic tang of danger. Without a word, he unbuttoned his suit jacket, draped it over a velvet armchair, and began to loosen his silk tie. "You can take it off," Jaden's voice broke the silence. It was a deep, gravelly baritone that vibrated through the floorboards. "The dress, it looks like it's cutting off the circulation to your lungs." Charlotte finally turned to face him. Her hands were trembling, but she balled them into tight fists at her sides, digging her manicured nails into her palms to ground herself. Her heart was a frantic drum against her ribs. This was the moment. The consummation of a Mafia marriage was a binding ritual, a blood pact sealed in the dark. She knew what was expected of her. She also knew she would rather die than live a life cowering in the shadow of a man who looked at her with the same disguised disgust her father did. "No," Charlotte said. Her voice wavered for a fraction of a second before hardening into steel. Jaden paused, his fingers lingering on his collar. His dark, piercing eyes, the color of a stormy ocean, locked onto hers. He didn't look angry. He looked assessing. "No," he echoed, his tone dangerously soft. "I won't be taking it off." Charlotte stepped forward, her heavy skirts rustling aggressively against the hardwood floor. "And we won't be sharing this bed. Not tonight. Not ever. I want a divorce." The words hung in the air, heavy and lethal. To deny a Mafia boss on his wedding night was an insult. To demand a divorce within an hour of taking the vows was a death sentence. Charlotte braced herself for the explosion. She expected him to draw the weapon she knew was holstered beneath his arm, or to cross the room and wrap his massive hands around her throat. Instead, Jaden simply stared at her. The silence stretched, tight as a piano wire, for one agonizing minute. A divorce, Jaden finally repeated, testing the word on his tongue as if it were a foreign delicacy. He walked over to a crystal decanter on a side table and calmly poured himself 2 fingers of amber liquid. "We haven't even cut the cake yet, Mia Mowgli, my wife. Isn't it a bit premature for legal dissolution?" "Don't mock me," Charlotte snapped, the years of repressed anger suddenly bubbling to the surface. She was tired of being the punchline. "I know exactly why I am here. Roland owed you $20 million he couldn't pay, so he gave you the daughter he didn't want. He pawned off the fat, ugly duckling of the Montgomery family because he couldn't bear to part with his precious Beatrice. I am collateral to you, a joke to your men, and a nuisance to your lifestyle." Jaden took a slow sip of his drink, his eyes never leaving her flushed, defiant face. "I am well aware of how your world works, Mr. Vitiello," Charlotte continued, her chest heaving as she fought against the restrictive corset. "You will keep me locked up in this glass cage. You will parade your thin, beautiful mistresses around the city while I am forced to play the slunt, dutiful wife who looks the other way. I refuse. I will not spend the rest of my life hating myself just to satisfy my father's debts and your ego. Kill me if you have to, but I am not doing this. I want an annulment." She stood there, chest rising and falling rapidly, waiting for the executioner's axe to fall. She had defied a monster. She was fully prepared to pay the price. Jaden slowly set his heavy crystal glass down on the polished mahogany. The soft clink echoed loudly in the tense room. He began to close the distance between them. With every predatory step he took, Charlotte forced herself to hold her ground, lifting her chin, refusing to cower. He stopped mere inches from her. Up close, the sheer magnitude of the man was overwhelming. He looked down at her, his gaze sweeping over her flushed cheeks, her defiant brown eyes, and the soft, heavy curves of her body squeezed into the agonizing white silk. "You think," Jaden said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that sent a shiver down her spine, "that your father offered you to me?" Charlotte frowned, her defensive walls faltering for a second. "I know he did." Jaden let out a dark, humorless chuckle. "Charlotte, your father didn't offer you. Roland offered me Beatrice." Charlotte felt the air vanish from the room. She stared at him, entirely thrown off balance by the revelation. "What? 3 months ago, in a private room at the Continental Club, your father sat across from me, sweating through his custom suit," Jaden explained casually, leaning his hip against the edge of a heavy oak desk. "He owed me $24 million, to be exact. He slid a photograph of your sister across the table. Blonde, size 2, former debutante of the year. He offered her hand in marriage to unite our families and clear the ledger." Charlotte's mind raced. "Then why am I here?" "Because," Jaden said, his eyes darkening with a fierce, unreadable intensity, "I told him to put the picture away. I told him I didn't want the porcelain doll. I demanded the architect." He reached behind him, opening the top drawer of the desk, and pulled out a thick manila folder. He tossed it onto the desk between them. It hit the wood with a heavy thud. "Open it," he commanded. Hesitantly, Charlotte stepped forward. Her fingers trembled slightly as she flipped open the cover. Inside were stacks of printed emails, complex routing numbers, offshore bank statements, and encrypted shipping manifests. It was a complete, meticulously documented trail of the Montgomery family's shipping logistics, specifically the highly illegal shadow networks they used to smuggle contraband through the port of Chicago. Charlotte felt the blood drain from her face. "Your father is a fool," Jaden said coldly. "Roland is a degenerate gambler who can barely operate a smartphone, let alone engineer a decentralized, blockchain-encrypted logistics network that has successfully bypassed federal port authorities for 3 years. Your brother, Thomas, is a cocaine-addicted idiot who spends his days crashing yachts. And Beatrice, well, Beatrice doesn't know how to spell logistics." Jaden took a step closer, towering over her. "It took my best hackers 2 months to crack the firewall on the Montgomery servers. And when we finally breached it, we didn't find Roland's digital footprint. We found yours." Charlotte swallowed hard. It was true. For 3 years, while her family mocked her weight and relegated her to the background of their glamorous lives, Charlotte had been the one sitting in the dark glow of her monitors, single-handedly keeping the family empire from complete collapse. She was a savant with numbers and systems. She had quietly built an impenetrable network that kept the family rich, receiving 0 credit and nothing but scorn in return. "I didn't buy a broodmare, Charlotte." Jaden's voice was suddenly much softer, yet infinitely more intense. "I didn't marry you for a trophy, or for an ornament on my arm, or to humiliate you. I married you because you are a genius. You are the only person in Chicago who can move 2 tons of untraceable cargo through a federal port without triggering a single alarm. I married you because my empire needs a strategist, and you are the best." Charlotte was paralyzed. For 24 years, she had been defined entirely by the space she took up, by the fat on her bones. To hear this ruthless, terrifying man strip all of that away and acknowledge her mind, her hidden, brilliant mind, left her speechless. "And," Jaden continued, his jaw tightening, "I married you to keep you alive." Charlotte's head snapped up. "What are you talking about?" "Did you honestly think I didn't know your family despises me?" Jaden asked, crossing his arms over his broad chest. "Roland didn't just agree to this marriage to settle a debt. He made a side deal with the Roman. The Russians want me dead, and your father wanted his debt erased and his precious company back." Jaden reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic object, tossing it onto the desk next to the folder. It was a charred, disarmed detonator. "My second-in-command, Lorenzo, pulled a block of C4 out from under the church altar 2 hours before you walked down the aisle today," Jaden stated, his eyes flashing with a cold, murderous rage. "Your father and your brother planned to blow us both to hell during the ceremony. They were willing to sacrifice you to wipe the slate clean with the Vitiello family and hand my territory to the Russians." Tears stung Charlotte's eyes, hot and sharp. Her family was cruel, yes. They were vain and emotionally abusive. But to murder her, to strap a bomb to the altar she was standing on? The betrayal felt like a physical blow to her chest. She placed a hand on the desk to steady herself, the restrictive corset suddenly making it truly impossible to breathe. She swayed slightly. Before she could fall, Jaden was there. His large, warm hands gripped her shoulders, steadying her. His touch wasn't harsh. It was incredibly grounding. "Breathe, Lottie," he ordered softly, using a nickname no one had called her since she was a little girl. They were going to kill me," she whispered, a tear slipping down her cheek. "They were going to try," Jaden corrected her, his voice absolute. "But I don't let people break my things, and I certainly don't let them kill my wife." He slowly moved his hands from her shoulders to the back of her dress. "This dress is a torture device," he muttered, his fingers finding the complicated lacing of the corset. "Turn around." Numbly, Charlotte obeyed. She felt his strong, calloused fingers working the tight laces at her back. With every pull, the agonizing pressure around her ribs released. When the corset finally gave way, Charlotte took her first full, deep breath of the day. The relief was staggering. "You asked for a divorce, Charlotte," Jaden said from behind her, his voice rumbling against her back. He didn't try to touch her bare skin, offering a respectful distance now that the dress was loosened. "If you walk out that door, you will be walking onto streets controlled by the Romanovs, with a family who wants you dead. You will be a brilliant woman who has nothing." He stepped around to face her again. The cold Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man offering a genuine, dangerous partnership. "Stay," Jaden offered, holding his hand out to her. "Be my wife in name and my partner in business. Take over the Vitiello logistics network. Let me show you what it feels like to be valued for exactly who you are, instead of what you weigh. And in return," a dark, predatory smile spread across his handsome face, "I will give you a front row seat as I dismantle your father's empire piece by piece and serve it to you on a silver platter." Charlotte looked at his outstretched hand. The heavy diamond on her finger caught the ambient light of the city. She had entered this room a victim, ready to demand an escape from a monster. Now the monster was offering her the keys to the kingdom. She took a deep breath, letting the heavy silk of the ruined wedding dress pool slightly around her waist. She looked up into Jaden Vitiello's eyes, and for the first time in her life, she felt truly, incredibly dangerous. She reached out and placed her hand in his. "Show me the ledgers," Charlotte said. 6 months had passed since the night Charlotte Montgomery shed her suffocating wedding gown and stepped into the underworld. The skyline of Chicago remained unchanged, but the shadows beneath it had been entirely rewritten. The underground command center of the Vitiello Syndicate hummed with the quiet electric energy of a high-stakes war room. Charlotte stood before a wall of glowing monitors, her eyes darting across encrypted tracking routes and fluctuating offshore accounts. She was no longer the shrinking, insecure woman who had been paraded to the altar. She wore a tailored, deep crimson pantsuit that accentuated her full curves, the rich fabric draping perfectly over her hips and bust. For the first time in her life, she wasn't hiding her body. She was weaponizing her presence. Jaden stood a few feet away, his arms crossed over his chest as he spoke in low, clipped tones to Lorenzo, his underboss. Whenever Jaden looked at Charlotte, which was often, the cold, calculating eyes of the Chicago boss softened into something fiercely possessive and deeply respectful. Their marriage had remained unconsummated in the physical sense, a silent agreement to build an empire of trust before sharing a bed. But the tension between them was palpable, a slow burning fire that heated the very air in the room. "They're moving tonight," Charlotte announced, her voice cutting through the low murmur of the command center. Jaden and Lorenzo immediately approached her station. "Roland and Victor Romanov?" Jaden asked, standing close enough that Charlotte could feel the heat radiating from his large frame. "Yes," Charlotte nodded, pointing a manicured finger at a blinking red cluster on the screen. "My father is predictable. He's leveraging the last of his liquid assets to help the Romanovs bring in a massive shipment of untraceable military-grade hardware through Pier 44. They think they've bypassed our security subroutines." Lorenzo frowned, leaning closer to the screen. "Pier 44? We locked down that sector weeks ago. How did they get the clearance codes?" A slow, dangerous smile spread across Charlotte's lips. Because I sent them. Jaden let out a low chuckle, his eyes gleaming with pride. You laid a honeypot. I fed them a breadcrumb trail of obsolete clearance codes, Charlotte explained, bringing up a side-by-side comparison of the logistics on the screen. Intercepted Romanov. Directive. Target, Pier 44, Container Block 7A. Clearance code, V-Delta 99. Vitiello perimeter weak. Proceed at 0200 hours. They believe they've outsmarted us, Charlotte continued. My father thinks he has successfully hacked the very system he believes I was too stupid to understand. What they don't know is that Pier 44 is an operational dead zone. I've rerouted the local port authority and the Federal Coast Guard to conduct an unannounced training drill exactly 3 blocks away from their drop-off point. So they sail right into a federal net, Lorenzo said, his eyebrows raising in genuine awe. He looked at Jaden. Boss, she's terrifying. I know, Jaden murmured, his gaze fixed intensely on Charlotte's profile. It's my favorite thing about her. Charlotte felt a flush of heat rise to her cheeks, but she held his gaze. We don't just want them arrested, Jaden. Arrests lead to trials, and my father has enough blackmail on local judges to walk. We need them broken, publicly and financially. What is the final phase, Lottie? Jaden asked softly, using the nickname that had become his private endearment for her. Charlotte tapped a key, bringing up the financial mainframe of the Montgomery family's corporate holdings. While they are busy panicking at the docks tonight, transferring all their focus to the seized cargo, Charlotte said, her voice dropping into a deadly calm. I am triggering a massive automated short sell on all Montgomery shipping shell companies. By 6 a.m. tomorrow, their stock will plummet to fractions of a penny. When the banks call to collect on the margin, Roland will have absolutely nothing. The empire will be legally liquidated. And who is going to buy the liquidated assets? Jaden asked, though the wicked smirk on his face suggested he already knew the answer. Charlotte turned fully toward her husband. I am, with my own holding company. Jaden reached out, gently tucking a stray lock of dark hair behind her ear. His large hand lingered on her jawline. The tenderness of the gesture stood in stark contrast to the ruthless ruin they were orchestrating. Lorenzo, Jaden commanded, never breaking eye contact with Charlotte. Gather the men. Let the Coast Guard take the Romanov pawns. We are going to personally pay a visit to Roland Montgomery. The private study of the Montgomery estate was steeped in the smell of stale cigar smoke and desperation. Roland Montgomery paced the length of his Persian rug, his face slick with a cold sweat. His golden boy son, Thomas, sat trembling on a leather sofa, mindlessly scrolling through his phone as the notifications of their financial doom poured in. Stock dropped 40%. Stock dropped 70%. Margin call from Chase. Accounts frozen. How is this happening? Roland bellowed, throwing his crystal whiskey glass against the stone fireplace. It shattered into 100 glittering pieces. The Romanovs were supposed to crush Vitiello. The shipment was supposed to clear our debts. Before Thomas could stutter a reply, the heavy oak doors of the study blew open. 4. Vitiello enforcers stepped into the room, their suppressed weapons drawn, securing the perimeter in seconds. Roland froze, all the color draining from his face as Jaden Vitiello walked slowly into the study. The Mafia boss wore a bespoke midnight blue suit, looking every inch the untouchable king of Chicago. Jaden, Roland choked out, his hands raising in an immediate gesture of surrender. Please, there's been a misunderstanding. The Romanovs forced me. Save your breath, Roland, Jaden interrupted, his voice a low, terrifying rumble. I'm not the one you need to grovel to tonight. Jaden stepped aside. From the shadowed hallway, Charlotte walked into the room. Roland gasped, stepping back as if he had seen a ghost. Thomas dropped his phone. Charlotte stood tall, her posture immaculate, the crimson of her suit stark against the dim lighting of the study. She looked at the two men who had tormented her for 2 decades. They looked small, pathetic. "Charlotte?" Roland whispered, his eyes wide. You're alive. We thought he killed you when the bomb failed. We thought you were a hostage." "I was never a hostage, Father," Charlotte said, her voice steady and echoing with authority. "And I am not the fat, useless burden you sold to clear your ledger." She walked over to his massive mahogany desk and dropped a thick, leather-bound portfolio onto the center of the blotting pad. "What is this?" Roland stammered. "Your surrender," Charlotte replied coldly. "I suggest you read the terms." Roland scrambled to the desk with trembling hands. He flipped open the portfolio. His eyes darted rapidly across the legal jargon, widening with every line. Complete asset transfer. 100% of Montgomery Shipping Logistics, warehouses, and corporate headquarters transferred to CV Holdings. Estate foreclosure. The Montgomery family estate, including all vehicles and secondary properties, seized for immediate auction. A trust dissolution. The private trust funds for Thomas and Beatrice Montgomery, permanently liquidated and absorbed. This is everything," Roland choked, looking up at her with tears of absolute terror in his eyes. "You've taken everything. Beatrice's trust, Thomas's accounts. How did you do this? You don't have this kind of money." "No," Jaden said, stepping up to stand right behind Charlotte. He placed a heavy, reassuring hand on the small of her back. "But my wife has access to the entire Vitiello Syndicate's treasury, and I gave her a blank check to buy your ruin." "Why?" Thomas cried out from the sofa. "We're your family, Charlotte." Charlotte turned her fierce gaze to her brother. "You stopped being my family the moment you planted explosives under the altar I was standing on. You traded my life for power. Now, I am trading your legacy for peace." She looked back at her father. "Sign the papers, Roland, or Jaden's men will leave you to the Romanovs. Victor lost $30 million of hardware tonight because of your bad intel. I imagine they are looking for someone to bleed." Faced with absolute destruction or painful death, Roland's shoulders collapsed. He picked up his expensive fountain pen and, with a shaking hand, signed his empire away to the daughter he had thrown away. Charlotte picked up the portfolio. She felt a profound, overwhelming lightness in her chest. The weight of her past was finally gone. "Get out of my house," Charlotte said quietly. "You have 1 hour." An hour later, high above the city in the penthouse of the Cialdini Tower, the heavy mahogany doors of the master suite clicked shut. The silence inside was no longer suffocating like it had been on their wedding night. It was warm, safe, and entirely theirs. Charlotte placed the signed portfolio on the side table. She felt a sudden wave of exhaustion, the adrenaline of the night finally leaving her system. She felt Jaden's presence behind her, before she felt his touch. His large hands slid around her waist, pulling her back against his solid, broad chest. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, inhaling deeply. "You were magnificent," Jaden murmured against her skin, sending a heavy shiver down her spine. "A ruthless, brilliant queen." Charlotte leaned back into his embrace, her hands coming up to rest over his. "It feels surreal. They have nothing. They have what they deserve," Jaden corrected softly. He turned her around in his arms, so she was facing him. His dark, stormy eyes searched hers, stripping away the armor she had worn all day. "But what do you have, Lottie?" Charlotte looked up at the fearsome Mafia boss who had seen past her physical shell and recognized the fire in her soul. She reached up, framing his strong jaw with her soft hands. "I have my empire," she whispered, "and I have my king." Jaden's eyes darkened with raw, unbridled desire. "Are you sure? Because once I kiss you, Charlotte, I am never letting you go. You are mine. Every brilliant thought, every soft curve, every inch of you. I wouldn't have it any other way," she breathed. When Jaden finally brought his lips down to hers, it was an explosion. There was no hesitation, no holding back. It was a kiss forged in fire, respect, and deep, undeniable love. He lifted her effortlessly, carrying her toward the massive bed at the center of the room. Tonight, there were no corsets. There was no fear. Charlotte Vitiello was exactly who she was meant to be. Powerful, adored, and the undisputed queen of the Chicago underworld. Charlotte's journey from a pawn to a powerful Mafia queen proves that true strength lies in brilliant minds, not societal expectations. She didn't just break the scales. She broke the entire empire that tried to hold her down. If you loved this intense, twist-filled story of revenge, romance, and claiming your true worth, hit that like button. Share this story with someone who loves a badass heroine, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel